Power of Babel, the podcast where nothing's off the table. From Bible mysteries and strange phenomena to the questions that keep you up at night, we explore it all with curiosity and faith. I'm your host, Courtney, joined by my co-hosts Caleb and Jeremy. Together, we dive into the weird, the wonderful, and the wildly curious. So grab your coffee, open your mind, and let's babble. Hello there, Babelites, and welcome back to the Power of Babel. I'm here with my co-host that I've missed so much because we were not together for our last episode. Hopefully you enjoyed, Caleb. Thanks for taking one for the team for us.
Of course.
If you haven't had a chance to listen or watch that episode, it's about 20-ish minutes long.
25, yeah.
25, yeah. Just had to get the extra 5 minutes
5 minutes,
in, didn't you?
Yeah.
Wow, just like him.
Yeah.
So the last time we were together, we were kind of talking about, it was like that question that I posed, right? I kind of took over the episode. But I had been reading the Iliad and the Odyssey, kind of just posed a question. Really, if I'm remembering, it was about like free will and that kind of thing. And so we had some scheduling issues and weren't able to get together. So Caleb just put out one kind of on the back of the whole Odyssey thing, right? Do you want to give us a little overview of what you talked about?
I was just kind of inspired by watching that movie, and you know, it's sort of resurrecting some of the thoughts that I had about the Odyssey, especially given that you'd been reading the Iliad and everything else. And so I basically just, if you haven't seen the episode, I just talk about some of the main themes, namely the theme of Xenia, or what they call Zeus's law in the movie, which is be kind to strangers. And the way they present it in the movie is kind of like the golden rule. It's like do unto others as you would have them do to you. And so I sort of just connected that to some biblical themes.
Yeah. It was a really great episode, and kind of just set us up for what we're going to talk about today, which is why I brought it up, and just kind of leaning into that a little bit more and going to talk about the image of God a little bit. Before we jump into it, though, have y'all been consuming anything else? I know we saw the Odyssey. 2 out of the 3 of us saw the Odyssey.
I was going to see the Odyssey, and then my niece wanted to come over and show me stuff from her vacation.
Priorities, people.
Yeah.
Priorities.
Yeah.
I know.
He has read the Odyssey, though, so that
I
counts.
have read the
It
Odyssey.
counts. You know what? I got about, I don't even know that I want to say it 3/4 of the way. I was really close to being finished with it before we saw the movie. That was the goal, and didn't finish it. And I haven't picked it up since the movie, but I want to, because not that there's not a lot of crazy stuff that happens with swine and Cyclops in the first like half of the book, but like everything happens at the end.
Also, the ending of the movie is quite different.
Yeah, that's
than
what my
book.
brother was telling me.
Yeah.
So I need to finish that one. But anywho, have y'all been seeing or reading or watching anything?
Yeah, I have. Well, I mean, I'll spare y'all most of it just because it would be a whole podcast episode. But as I've mentioned in other episodes, that I've been reading a lot on things related to like conspiratorial thinking.
Yeah.
I think the last time we talked about, I had read a book or was reading a book on the Kennedy assassination. I read that one, but I have recently in the last few months read a book on the Roswell, New Mexico incident. I read a couple of books on 9/11. I read a book called Warrant for Genocide, which is a really excellent book. It's about the protocols of the Elders of Zion.
What a title!
Yeah, it's actually a really interesting historical book. And just lots of just gobs. Another good book on aliens, UFO stuff. If you're interested in that, called it's a strange title. I think it's called Passport to Magonia by Jacques Vallée. And it is a comparison of ancient phenomena to the UFO stuff.
Okay.
And the whole book is just like comparing cases and showing how they're so similar, some of the reports that people had in ancient times. And what the book shows is that in ancient times, people interpreted those experiences as spiritual experiences, whereas in modern times people interpret the exact same experiences through UFO terminology. And so it doesn't
Interesting.
really have a thesis. It just sort of presents the evidence. So that's an interesting book. You should
Yeah.
give that
That's
a read.
interesting.
Wow.
Yeah.
So what you're saying is that you're a conspiracy theorist.
No, I read it for the precise
So
opposite reason.
you're on more watch lists than I am now,
Yeah.
basically, probably.
Yeah, for sure. No, I've actually just sort of been tracing what are the common threads of why people think in conspiratorial terms. And I actually think I have learned a lot in terms of like the kinds of things. Usually it's when there are multiple bodies of evidence that explain something, something that's either um, hard to accept because of
Hmm.
the weight of whatever it was that happened. Like in the case of 9/11, that's a good example of that, right? It's just like something that's like we can't believe this happened,
Yeah.
and
Fire can't melt steel. Yeah,
yeah,
etc.
exactly. You're just flagged on YouTube. But
That's all.
the the kinds of things that people it's hard for people to accept, and so what they try to do is they try to create some kind of a single explanation, usually in the form of a conspiracy that says
Yeah.
that this was this makes it has to make sense, and the way it makes sense is that someone's pulling the strings,
Hmm.
instead of swallowing the tough pill that says actually there are a number of things that contributed to this exceptional event happening.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, but yeah, there's lots of interesting takeaways, some really good theological takeaways that maybe we can talk about in future episodes too.
Yeah. I would like to do that. That
Yeah,
sounds lovely. What about you, Jeremy? You got anything
I'm
to
just,
update us on?
I've been reading some old sword and sorcery comics like Conan the Barbarian,
nice.
King Conan, the old Marvel stuff, really
Yeah,
good.
I don't
And
know what any of that is.
it's you would probably hate it, but it it is kind of in this wheelhouse of the fact that like he's a very interesting character because Robert E. Howard, who was the original creator of Conan, not a comic book creator but an author, a prose author, created this iconic character really as a way to critique what he saw as a lot of decadence of modern society and the effeteness of Western civilization.
Mm.
Right? He thought that people were way too hung up and in their own minds, and there were all kinds of trappings and injustices and stuff that came along with modern society. And so he created this barbarian character who actually had a deeply seated moral compass, but he was above all else a man of action. And it was interesting setting him in like a fictional, like prehistory amongst other highly developed, not necessarily technologically advanced, but highly developed civilizations. And then having him, who is basically like a pagan who believes in like a very distant god, but that is still a god that doesn't really care about him, versus like sorcerers and necromancers and how he responds to that kind of thing. And also because of the time period, some of the authors are getting into styling those sorcerers and necromancers as like people who are dabbling in concepts and things that like what we would call the new age.
Hmm.
And so if you know what to look for, it's actually a really interesting kind of like clash of worldviews and stuff. And Roy Thomas, the legendary comic book writer, wrote tons of Conan stuff. And he does a really fantastic job really exploring these themes. And so I don't know. I just like the stories. They're a lot of fun. Guy with a sword beats up wizards or brigands or whatever. And
yeah.
runs around, but also you have this other stuff in the background. So it's a lot deeper than you might think if you're just familiar with like the Arnold
I was
Schwarzenegger
gonna say
Conan.
people are probably thinking Arnold
Yeah.
right now, but this is the source material.
Yeah.
I wasn't thinking of
Yeah.
anything, if I'm being honest.
So there you go. Yeah.
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 Oh, fun stuff. What have I been reading? I am almost finished with a book by Richard Foster called It's About Prayer. Um, I started it to kind of like pregame for our 21 days of prayer our church does in August, and then it's just kind of turned into this kind of, I don't know, I don't want to say deep dive, but I've been reading through the Psalms in my prayer time,
Mm.
and it's been really, really good. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah.
It's just kind of opening up other things. That's really, I'm not reading anything like for pleasure right now. I don't feel like I'm finding a lot of pleasure in what I'm reading though. and just the Bible has been like a big source of like study for me right now. So my husband and I just started the Bible Project has like their like master classes,
Mm.
and we just started one on it's called the Messianic Torah, and it's about the Sermon on the Mount. I had done they had like a whole podcast series of it a while back, but this one, obviously their master class like goes like super deep into it, and it's really we've done one already. It's really really cool. So
Yeah,
super
they're
excited
awesome.
about that.
We love them.
Yeah, shout out Bible
Yeah,
Project.
they're
Check
great.
them out.
Fantastic stuff.
But yeah, I've also per a recommendation from Caleb started the Naked Bible,
Yeah.
right? Podcast by Michael Heiser. May he rest in peace.
Yeah.
What a loss. Really good, but something that I was listening to in it kind of brought up a new perspective for me with the Ten Commandments, actually.
Okay.
And I feel like it kind of, hopefully, this will kind of segue us into our topic today. I just wanted to kind of throw this out and have a discussion around it because it was something new for me when they're talking about the commandment of taking the Lord's name in vain.
Oh yeah.
And they just, I forget, I
Or
think,
carrying the Lord's name in
yes,
vain.
what they said in the episode was bearing
Yeah.
God's name.
Mm.
Because growing up, learning about the Ten Commandments as a child, um, in my mind, I've constantly been thinking about like in a speaking term,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like, and even growing up, your mom or dad or grandparents might say, "Stop! Don't say God," when you're saying things. But that episode specifically really shifted my perspective on um getting to the root of it's really just you're an image bearer of God, and how you go about and bear His name. So I don't know if y'all have any
Yeah.
thoughts around that,
I,
or
I do. So this will probably segue us into
yeah.
the broader conversation, I
Mm-hmm.
think. Um maybe not in the order I was going to do it, but
Sorry.
no, it's good because this is a good touch point. So I'm not aware of any Hebrew scholar or any Jewish commentator or anything like that who takes that commandment to be related particularly to speech.
Mm-hmm.
It is not about speech. Now, that's
Says
not to say that that the commandment couldn't encompass things that include speech,
right.
but it's not about speech. Whereas
So where do you think that we got that? Because I'm not the only person I feel like that has
so,
had that way of thinking from their upbringing.
yeah.
Yeah, a lot of people take that as the don't cuss commandment,
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
which is a really, really simplistic and kind of missing the point
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
way to look at it. Um,
Yeah.
I don't know off the top of my head how that got kind of bowdlerized into that, but I think I would suspect it has a lot to do with incidental historical things and developments within, especially evangelicalism,
Mm.
but the Western Church more generally, to where at certain times there was more of an emphasis on moral purity.
Mm,
And I would suspect that there was some proof texting going on that
that's a good
said,
point.
oh, well, it says this in the Ten Commandments. Well, don't cuss because it says this in the Ten Commandments.
Yeah.
And it's like, no, you can make a good argument for not cursing. But that particular commandment is probably not the way to do that.
Yeah.
I don't know, Caleb. What do you
Yeah,
think?
I think the point I hadn't actually thought about that about the proof texting thing as a historical reason for it. That's probably true. I mean,
I'm just spitballing there,
yeah,
by the way.
just thinking about that, that probably is true, especially within the fundamentalist sort of era. I think that people probably naturally a lot of people did Bible study and still do, frankly, to this day. As in, here's this thing that I already think. Let me proof text it by
Mhm.
finding a verse in somewhere in Scripture that
Mhm.
sounds like it says what I want it to say,
Yeah.
which is a horrible hermeneutic.
Right.
Right, because what happens is you take things out of context and you misunderstand what they mean. So that's a really good point. The other reason I think though is that this may not have happened. This may have actually happened organically as well, which is that because the meaning of that particular commandment is obscured in English translations of the text.
Mm.
Because it says, "Don't take the name of the Lord your God in vain" in some translations,
Mm-hmm.
which it's obscured by a couple of things. However you translate that term that's translated as take, something more like carry or bear is probably a better translation,
Yeah.
which immediately gives a different connotation to the verse if you change that one word. The other thing is that when we talk about doing something with a name,
Mm.
Your mind, at least within the Western world, at least, we think of speech immediately because
Right.
names are something that you speak,
Right.
Yeah.
right? But the problem is, and we have definitely talked about this on other podcast episodes, which is what I know Michael Heiser uses this term, this idea of name theology.
Mm-hmm.
And name theology is sort of highlighting the point that within the Jewish theological context, the name, not just the name of God, but really the name of anything, names and identity
Yeah.
are synonymous.
Yeah.
And therefore, in Jewish theology, the name of God, and the presence of God are synonymous. They cannot be separated. So when you invoke the name of God, what you're invoking is the presence of God, which is why, if you go back to some of the texts in the Old Testament where God is promising to make his dwelling among his people, he keeps saying that he will make his name dwell in Jerusalem, that he will make his name dwell in the temple that Solomon will build. And the reason why is because the name is his presence.
Yeah.
This is why the Ark of the Covenant is called the Ark of the Testimony of the Name, right?
I think we have, yeah, and sometimes we can start to get there by thinking of this like we have this saying in the name of, like I'm doing this in the name
Yeah.
of someone, but that doesn't even really capture the fullness of what you're saying.
It's actually even more
because
profound. Yeah.
in the name, if I do something in the name of someone, because I'm deputized to do it, whatever. That has a little bit of the authority, whatever. I'm connected to them somehow, but it's virtual. It's at a level of remove. What you're saying is that the name, invoking the name, carrying the name, is about presence.
Yes. Yes, and so this sort of segues us into the first way in which, because what I'm going to argue is that there really are fundamentally two ways of understanding what the image of God is. And the first one, because this is what we're really sort of flirting with here, is a view called functionalism, or the functional view of the image of God. And what this is the claim that being an imager of God actually is not, it's actually something that you do, right? And it is certain kinds of being, the beings that are made in the image of God. It is what you are because God made you, but he made you for a purpose, right? So the idea here is that it is, yes, it's an identity, but it's an identity that is aimed at a function.
Just to back up for a second, so when we're talking about being made in the image of God, many of our listeners are probably familiar with this, but just in case, the number one most important touchstone for this concept in the Bible is Genesis 1:26-27.
Yeah.
Where it talks about God creating mankind. He says, in the image of God, he created them, male and female. He created them. And it emphasizes image multiple times, consecutive verses. And because this is an important context. And then, interestingly, frustratingly for us, it doesn't really elaborate on what it means to be made in the image of. So that's why we're talking about it. That's why, scholars, theologians throughout the years have grappled with what does this mean. And so the functional definition.
One of the reasons why many scholars have opted for a functional definition is because of, in the immediate context of those verses that Jeremy just mentioned, it says that he made them in his own image. Let us make man in our image, and then it says, and then God made. There's that divine counsel thing, by the way. Let us, but then it goes back to the singular when it says
pulling out books.
Oh, there you go, Michael Heiser. So the singular, God makes man in his own image, and then male and female, right? So the text is very clear that it is both man and woman, and then it says that they are made in his own likeness, just to continue to drive home this point that they resemble him in some way. We'll come back to that as well. And then the context is that he gives them a commission, right? He says, be fruitful, multiply, have dominion over the earth. And this context of the commission, which by the way is something that is repeated over and over especially in the early chapters of the Bible, it's repeated not only to Adam and Eve but also to their descendants. This be fruitful, multiply, have dominion. What scholars will argue, and I think they have a really good textual case to make here, to say that being made in God's image is intimately connected with this commission that God has given them to rule the earth,
Yeah.
right? And to rule the earth as His imager.
Well, I I do agree with that. But to switch to a different book, William Lane Craig,
Yeah, it's
in
a great
his
book.
Wow,
discussion
you
of
brought two
yeah,
powerhouses with you.
Yeah.
Okay, then.
William Lane Craig. This is in Quest of the Historical Adam.
Yeah.
William Lane Craig in this book goes over very briefly a couple of different camps, and he talks about the functional versus substantialist. One of the things he says on the point that you just brought up, which is that the image of God is raised in a context of close proximity to what people are supposed to be doing on the earth, right? Basically, who we are and our job is connected. Craig says, yes, that's true, but we have to remember that the job of something and what it does is not a definition of that thing. So, for example, a car, its job is to move me around, but that doesn't define what a car is. So, and I think that's a good point. And there's also something, especially in the Old Testament, also in the New Testament, is that we have to remember is that proximity, while important, doesn't necessarily imply causality, right?
Yeah.
So there's not necessarily a a connection or an identity between who we are and what we are supposed to do. I think that there is, but in this case, but we still need to be sensitive to the fact that we can be something without having to necessarily do something. And that's where we start to get into like another one of the views, which is the substantialist view. Probably the main competitor to the functionalist view. You could probably define all of the different ideas of what image means as some combination of one of those two views.
Yeah.
And so the problem with the functionalist view, in my opinion, and other people like Heiser, Craig have pointed this out, is that because we are limited creatures, and I'm summarizing here, our function, what we are supposed to do and what we can do, especially what we can do, is contingent on the situations in which we find ourselves and our innate faculties, which can be removed, can be challenged, can be limited, for example, by physical disability, right? You could say, well, people, their function is to use reason. Well, there are plenty of people who don't have the ability to do that, whether temporarily or long term, because of various, traumas or things that have happened to them, or who were born with lacking that cognitive ability. And so if you say, okay, well, functional is what we do, we subdue the earth and do it, and then what about the people who can't really actively participate in that because we are limited creatures, we're contingent? Do we then say that those people who can't participate in that mission, not who choose not to, but who just literally can't participate in that, do they lack God's image? And this is, I think, the main criticism and challenge to the functionalist view.
So
Interesting.
it's a criticism and challenge that I'm going to argue can be levied at both views.
Fair.
And I will say that, putting my cards on the table, I think that it fails in both cases. That objection fails if you articulate it correctly. So let me just say a couple more words about this functionalist thing, and then we'll try to flesh out more what Jeremy's talking about with the substantialist view, or what I have often termed the ontological view, because ontology is about the nature of things, the way things are. Because basically the two options are this, just to sort of simplify it for the audience, is the functionalist view says the image of God, yes, it is something that you are, but it is primarily driven by a commission or a task, a job that you are given, a role that you are to play, right? And then the other view, that whether you call it substantialist or ontological view, is the view that it really is the kind of thing you are, right? And that you possess certain properties by your very nature that make you an imager of God, right? Those are the two options that are on the table here.
Yeah.
Now, with respect to this functional view from a biblical point of view, the reason why I say they have a really good textual argument is that we need to think about some of the terminology that the biblical authors use when communicating this to us, which is this idea of image,
Mm-hmm.
right? And you know, just to sort of put a bow on your commandment question, right? Is this the idea is if what we said is true, that the name of God is synonymous with the presence, with God's presence itself, then the commandment, which should be translated as "you shall not carry or bear the name," or maybe translated a little bit more, "you shall not bear the presence of the Lord your God in vain." Um, th- that gives us a brand new light on what that commandment is. And what it's saying is, look, you, in some sense, carry God with you,
Yes.
right? Why? Well, if we understand the image of God as being the fact that even on either view, if it's something that we are or something that we do, I'm representing um, God in the same
Mm-hmm.
way that someone might represent a foreign dignitary, right? Something like that. I think Jeremy mentioned that a moment ago. But even in a more profound sense, because it's not just that I'm representing him, but that I'm not just symbolically having his authority, but I also carry him, his actual presence with me.
Yeah.
And so the commandment is saying, don't do this in vain, right? Don't represent me poorly. Don't claim to carry me into some place or circumstance or what have you, or endeavor, and yet do a poor job of that, right? So this idea is connected, I think, to the ancient Near Eastern idea of images and idols.
Yes.
And the reason why is because um, people had lots of in a polytheistic society, people had lots of images, right? They would carve out an image of a particular deity, and they would pray to the image. They would do rituals and all kind of pious acts towards this image of the deity, and the image represented the god.
Mm-hmm.
Now, they never necessarily thought that the image was the god. However, some did believe that the spirit of the god in some way would possess the image.
Yeah.
I'm reminded, this is something else that stood out to me recently in some readings. I think it was Aaron, right? When Moses is on the mountain and the golden calf.
Mm-hmm.
When I read this, something just kind of stood out to me. In my reading, I was assuming that he was making, in previous readings, I thought that he was creating a statue to worship another god. But in my recent readings, I want to say that I read it in a lens of, no, he was actually trying to worship Yahweh by creating this calf. Um, is that the kind of lens that you're
So
talking about?
yes, it's very closely connected, and the reason why is because the thing that I'm sort of trying to map out, this ancient Near Eastern
Mm-hmm.
idea of having graven images that represent a god, or that are the image of that god, is why we get another one of the 10 Commandments, which is do not make any graven image.
Yes.
And this is not primarily, I don't think, I mean, I think it encompasses idolatry, in terms of idolatry in the way that we think of the word. When we say idolatry in a modern Western context, at least, people think of worshiping foreign gods,
Mm-hmm.
right? Which is true. That is idolatry. But what the context of that commandment is, I think it's talking about any graven image that is representative of a foreign rival god, but also it is, the commandment explicitly forbids making an image of Yahweh.
Yeah.
Don't make any images of Yahweh. It says don't make any images of him represented by things in the air or things in the sea. Don't use any creeping thing on the
Mm-hmm.
ground to represent him.
And we've talked about this,
We have
right?
Yeah.
talked about
I'm
this.
remembering now. We've had an episode. I don't remember what the topic was, but
Well,
We
I
I
think
remember us talking about.
I
Yeah.
think it was about representations of God in art.
In art. That's
Yeah,
what it
Okay.
was. Yeah.
because
Yeah.
there are people who take that and they say, well, you can't make any drawing of Jesus, or you can't do something like
Right.
The
Yeah.
Chosen because it's portraying Jesus, and that's not actually Jesus. You're just making a graven image of
Right.
Jesus. And I think
Yeah, I remember
that's
now.
misguided. But this whole point about idolatry is, I think, really super relevant. And it goes back to the context that Caleb was talking about, where there were tons of idols everywhere. There were not only idols in temples, there were also what were called household gods,
Yeah.
right? Where people would have these little like personal family idols. They'd have them, and then they'd pray to them or keep them, and this
Like
shows
a
up.
figurine.
Yeah, like a
Yeah.
figurine, right? So these
Like
things
a
were
oh
everywhere.
no.
They were fairly, they were just all over the place.
That was
And
good, Jeremy.
yeah.
That was good.
So am I going to hell for having a figurine of Captain America Steve Rogers
Yeah.
over here? I don't think so.
It's pretty cool.
By the way, holding the hammer of a
Yeah.
god
Oh
in his
yeah.
hand.
I
Wrinkle there.
felt a little bit like a nerd for understanding what I was looking at.
Yeah.
When you brought that, I was like, I know exactly what that is, and it made me feel a little nerdy.
Yeah.
So this is Steve Rogers as Captain America holding the hammer Mjolnir, which is Thor's hammer in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. This is from Endgame, in an iconic scene where he's deemed worthy to wield the hammer. Why did I bring this? Well, just to illustrate the point, right? And to also say that, this is not an idol. It's not used in worship. It's
You don't
just,
pray to that?
no, I don't. It's
Thank
just something
God.
cool that I have up on my bookcase. But,
I was worried for a time.
this is a kind of, we can pretend for a second, like this is physical image of something, right?
Mhm.
And there would be tons of these in the ancient Near East that people would pray to or revere or just have in their house as good luck charms or whatever. And as a consequence, there are tons of different terms for these things that we find in the Bible.
Yeah.
Right. So, this is what makes the problem of figuring out what image means here very difficult, right? Because if I'm gonna put on my language nerd hat for a second. So words are actually really complicated things. Um, and for the last couple of hundred years, people have especially leaned into the idea that a word is not a static thing. It changes over time. Its meanings, its associations, and even at any given time, it is a cluster of associations and concepts that we can't totally pin down with other words, right? This is why sometimes a dictionary is helpful, but it can be kind of frustrating because the real meaning of a thing is its significance that tends to go beyond words. And why am I getting into all this? It's because when we say idol, that's a word, that's a signifier, we could say, that triggers a cluster of associations in your own brain
Mm.
based on your cultural context, your level of education, where you've seen that word in the past, how you feel about that word, how other people that have spoken, all of these things, right?
Yeah.
All of these things. And those are all in play. And this is why a lot of times people talk past each other even when they're using the same terms because they have different assumptions and associations, right? And then imagine that over the scale of history of the Bible, and then imagine that over the like melting pot and like clashes of cultures in the ancient Near East at any given time, and you get a sense of how complicated this could potentially be. So we can't just go back to the text in Genesis and say, well, idol meant this at any particular time. Number one, because we have to reverse engineer that and do a lot of good solid guesswork. But number two, it's hard to do that for words that we're familiar with in our native language at this point in time.
Yeah.
So I just did like a word study, basically, of idol and the Hebrew word that was used there, but also to get like a little bit of a contrast at a different historical juncture of the Septuagint and what word was used there for that. So if you don't know, the Septuagint was like a Greek translation of the Old Testament used. It was like it was current during Jesus's day, right? And it was useful because it was, you know, um, the Bible put into Greek. More people spoke Greek
The
than
language
Hebrew.
of the
Yeah,
day. Yeah.
yeah, it was kind of the language of the day. And so basically, a bunch of rabbis said, okay, well, here's what it said in Hebrew. This is the word we would choose to represent that word in Greek. And what you find is that in the Old Testament, there are Hebrew words, multiple Hebrew words for like idol or graven image or image. And then sometimes they mix and match Greek words for idol and image and representation and things. And it's not always a one-to-one correspondence, right?
Interesting. Yeah.
Because there's different clusters of concepts, right? Like,
Mhm.
let's say Hebrew has 3 words, and those 3 words are divided up among these clusters. But then the Greek words, the Venn diagram looks totally different. And oh, by the way, there are like 5 words or something, right? This is just an example. I'm making this up. So in Genesis 1, the Hebrew word for image, that we are created in the image of God, is selim. And Strong's dictionary, which again, you have to look at this as a historical point in time, what this very smart, very learned scholar said based on his own associations in English, how he would describe the cluster of concepts to his contemporaries. He'd say that, well, Selem means a phantom. Figuratively, it's like a resemblance or a representative figure, especially an idol. It can also have negative context in some cases, like it's an image or like vanity or like like pretension. But what's interesting about this definition is he highlights the fact that how it begins is this is metaphorical. There's actually another Hebrew term for just the physical that emphasizes the physicality of an idol, or it seems to in my non-expert, overview of this, called maskith, which is literally a figure carved from stone, right? It's like a particular type of physical idol. There's also pesel, which is I believe another site. There's a specific term for household gods. It's kind of like the old adage about what is it, the Inuit who have lots of snow. They have like 30 different words for snow.
Yeah.
If there's a lot of idols and different types of idols floating around, you need specific words for how to identify all of them. But tsalim, while it can mean in certain contexts an idol, what it seems to more accurately point to is the act of representation
Mm.
or the resemblance. And I've saw some other places I went through. I'm not going to go through all of these exhaustively, but it's interesting in Genesis 5. So within the very close proximity, within the same corpus in the Bible, um, at least by the same compiler, Moses. This is also used to describe Adam siring Seth.
Yeah.
And it says Seth was in the image of Adam, something to that effect.
Mm.
Yeah.
And so that says, okay, well, and obviously Seth was a physical being, but also this is not just about like, it looks like him. No, there's some kind of deeper connection there.
Yeah.
Interestingly, this in Tselem is translated as icon, frequently translated as icon in the Septuagint, which is where we get our, the Orthodox term for icons, like Orthodox icons, which are not just, at least according to their theology, not just pictorial or physical representations, but they are deemed to have a greater spiritual significance. There's some kind of deep meaning. They're a gateway
Yeah, I was
into
gonna say
actual
they often
presence.
describe icons as
Mhm.
a window
Yes.
into the spiritual realm.
Yes. And this is in contrast to the Greek eidolon, which is where we get our term for idol, which means an image for worship of heathen gods. And what's interesting is that these terms, maskith and selim, are used in the same verse of the Bible for the same thing, different things. We don't really know in Numbers 33:52, where it talks about driving out and destroying the pagan gods
Mm.
Yeah.
that were in the promised land. And so we can't really say that these terms are completely separated. We can't say that they are all just different words for the same thing. There's something more complicated going on here. But I hope I haven't bored you to tears with that. But basically, what I'm saying is this is very complicated. We can't just go to a resource and point to a definition and say that's it. And anybody who tries to do that or tries to say, well, this is what it means based on that, just hasn't gotten into the literature enough.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think that there can be an oversimplification of that. The connection between the image of God as it relates to humanity and the ancient Near Eastern practice of using images or idols.
Yeah.
Mhm.
That some scholars I think do make that sort of flat sort of thing, and they'll say, well, look, we have this observable practice from these ancient cultures, and so this is what the image of God is about. And what I want to say is they're definitely related,
Mm-hmm.
right? There's a relation. And your question about the golden calf, I think, and go back and listen to our discussion on, I think it was about art. We were talking about that. The idea is they do present it, at least, as he says when the calf is done. He says, "Behold, the God who led you out of Egypt,"
Mm-hmm.
right? Yahweh. Um, so there is a at the very least, on a biblical level, there is the prohibition to create graven images or idols is connected to this idea of humanity as the representative or image of God. And the
Mm-hmm.
reason why, I mean, think about the logic of this. So the commandment says, "Don't make any graven images of me," God says. Anything on land, nothing in the sea, nothing in the air. And the reason why is because he's saying, I already have an image on the earth,
Mm-hmm.
right? I already have an image on the earth. I've told you what my image is on the earth, and it's you.
Mm-hmm.
You are my representative, right?
Yes.
And so there is this close connection where he says, "Look, any image that you create of me will be inferior to me, but it'll also be inferior to the thing that I have already designated as
Yep.
my image, which is you."
Mm-hmm.
And the prophets in the Old Testament go into that, explicitly.
Yeah.
They say, What are y'all doing? The idols you're making can't even do what you can do.
Right.
Like, why are you worshiping this
Well,
thing?" And then,
even
you take the other part of it and burn it so you can keep warm.
Yeah.
Isn't this silly?
Yeah.
yeah. Well, even just thinking about it in that aspect of the creator creating us in his image and us the created ones creating him, an image of him, it just
It's
seems like very
backwards.
Yeah.
backwards.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's backwards. And so the question then becomes, okay, so if we sort of straighten out in our mind the reason why it's inappropriate to do this backwards thing of creating this image, because we're supposed to be the image, and God is saying, "Look, the image I've created of myself is superior to anything that you can make." The question is, why is it superior?
Hmm.
Is it superior merely because of the designated function that he has given us? Or is it because there is some intrinsic property or something about us that makes us superior to those graven images?
Can the
And
answer be both?
well, this is what I'm going to argue. What
Yes.
what I'm going to argue is that this is a false dichotomy, and I'm actually kind of
Yes.
confused by why so many in the scholarly community sort of fall on in one of these camps, and they argue at each other, and I'm really
I
confused by that, because I don't understand why there should be a disjunction
I have a very hot
between.
take on that.
Yeah.
It's just the brief version is it's a disease that's endemic to Western analytical philosophy
Mm,
because w- through a series of the way that Western philosophy has developed, we have been encouraged to think of substance and function, what I think is and what I think does, as separate little categories.
yeah.
And so, because a lot of these analytic philosophers are reared intellectually in a tradition that doesn't question that dichotomy, they take on that dichotomy. And so, in trying to explain things, they replicate that same assumption and say, well, there's what it is, what it does. And these are two different things. And so we can pit them against each other. When in reality, the common sense thing, like what Courtney said, what Caleb says, what I would say, is that no, actually, these things go hand in hand.
Yeah.
It just doesn't sound, but it's very difficult to describe that in a way that sounds fancy.
Well, I think here's what I'm gonna say. I'll have to think. I'd have to think about that in terms of like what the origin of the why there's a dispute here.
I mean, that's my hot take.
Yeah.
Your mileage may vary,
I,
but
but I'll say this. I will say that okay, given the representative books that you've brought, okay, so the two scholars in this case, right, are William Lane Craig and Michael Heiser. I think there are strengths on both of their arguments, but I actually think might be a hot take. People will be upset by this, which is that I actually think that Heiser is a little bit muddy on this issue.
Yeah.
He's a his or at least let me put it this way: his articulation, I think, is confused,
Hmm.
because when I read him, like in the book in the Unseen Realm, when he's talking about the image of God, I'm reading it thinking, yes, I agree. I think he does a phenomenal job with the biblical data,
Hmm.
right? The textual data of and the functional aspects of it for sure. But then I think actually when he drifts into the philosophical ramifications is where things become slightly confused. So let's take this thing that Jeremy brought up earlier, okay, which is the worry that um, if you assign the image of God or connect the image of God, this is from Heiser's point of view, by the way, this is his worry,
Yeah.
that if you connect the image of God with a set of properties, right? Properties or traits, right? Or capacities,
Right.
right? That people might have. If you say, look, these set of properties are really what it means to have God's image. The worry that he sort of brings forward is the one that Jeremy mentioned, which is, well, what about someone who has severe mental disabilities,
Yeah.
or someone who is in a vegetative state, or something like that?
Or like infants, or like rational
Yeah,
choice.
yeah, the unborn, right?
Rational choice is supposed to be one of these big ones for a lot of Christian philosophers
It,
who
it,
lean into functionalism. And it's like, okay, but like babies can't really be said to rationally choose.
well,
Are they not in the image of
it
God?
might be helpful to outline what the popular traits are that
Mm-hmm.
people want to. So on the ontological or substantial view, what people will say is, look, there are these certain properties, there are these certain things that humans possess
Mm-hmm.
that are unique, and those things come from God, and that's what makes us different,
Yeah.
right?
Like sets us apart from other
That's
creation.
right. And
So.
so the things that people typically will refer to are things like freedom of the will,
Mm-hmm.
right, which Jeremy just mentioned, consciousness,
Mm-hmm.
right, or self-aware consciousness, let me say, and moral agency or
Yeah.
moral capacity. Usually these are, I mean, there are others. You could probably name a couple
Yeah.
dozen things,
S-
but those three are the really big ones.
Heiser, yeah, and Heiser gives the list. That pretty much sums it up. But Heiser also includes things like the presence of a soul or spirit, the ability to commune with God, emotions, like it's like kind of a grab bag, right? It's like, what
Sure.
does it mean to be human? What can humans do? Well, let me
Mhm.
keep listing things, and then
Right.
50 years later, I might have scratched the
So
surface.
Heiser will say, he will respond to the ontological view, and he basically rejects that view in favor of a functional view, which is a little odd. I'll get to that in a second. It's a little odd, but he essentially does this because what he says is, look, if I attach the
Mm,
image of God to certain properties that people have, and then those properties are obstructed either in the unborn or the disabled or whatever, then you could argue that those people are not in God's image, or that they're not human in some way. Um, Here's my problem. Well, I got two problems with it. One problem I have is that I don't think that makes any sense, because if let me ask you, Court, if you are the kind of being who has free will, moral agency, and consciousness, okay, do you stop being that kind of being when you go to sleep?
No.
No. But you're not conscious while you're asleep,
Yeah.
right? You're unconscious. You don't make free will decisions, and you are not making moral actions either.
right.
But no one, I don't think anyone rational would say that you cease to be that kind of being. Why? What we're talking about is we're talking about being of the class of being that has these
Right.
properties
Yeah.
typically. Now, there may be individual circumstances in which those are obscured or obstructed, or
It seems
maybe,
time bound a little bit
Yeah.
too, in thinking of like unborn
Yeah.
children or infants. Like that's time bound, not
well, I think what you would
necessarily.
want to say, yeah, exactly. What I think you would want to say is that, look, you do not have to manifest a given property in order to possess it,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
I can have the property of being a moral being without doing a moral action,
I
right?
can have the ability to recite the alphabet without actually reciting the
Yeah,
alphabet,
exactly.
right?
And
Yeah.
so what we would want to say is that, yes, even the unborn, or those who have mental incapacitation or whatever, they're all of the class of being that has these properties. So I don't think that actually works. The other problem that I have is that I don't see how that same problem doesn't also apply to the functionalist view.
Yeah.
Because the claim is, if what makes me someone who is in the image of God is that I have this vocation or this
Yeah.
calling, well, if I can't fulfill the calling, does that make me less of an imager of God?
Mm.
Well, I think someone like Heiser would say, well, no, because whether
Mhm.
you fulfill but it's the same
It's the
answer
same
to the
Yeah,
thing.
this
problem.
is
Yeah.
this is why, like, earlier, this is my critique of functionalism, and I stole it from Heiser's critique of substantialism, or onto the
Exactly.
ontological view.
The sword cuts both
It's
ways.
exactly because we are contingent time bound. I think time is a huge factor in this, because how okay, so we are ontologically, we are a type of being, right? Well, okay, but like we're never just existing. Like we're not self-existent. We're never just existing. To be human is to be doing something,
Yeah.
right? And what is the what is the, is being, to be, an active verb or a passive verb, right? Well,
Mhm.
grammatically, it's just kind of it's just the being verb. It's not active. It doesn't take a direct object. But, to exist, your heart has to be beating. There has to be things, as humans, there has to be things happening, physically. And so it's this line between pure existence and pure action
Yeah.
is it's a fantasy of philosophy.
Yeah.
And we just
What you are and what you do
yeah,
cannot be divorced from one another.
right.
Now,
Yeah.
what Dr. Craig says, with the argument that he makes, I think is the correct one. Now, of course, I may have my own intellectual biases in this direction, but I think that this makes sense, which is what he says is, look, yes, the image of God is a commission. It
Mhm.
is a calling. It's a duty that is given to humanity, but it is enabled or it's grounded in the fact that you have the capacity to fulfill it,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mhm.
Which means that you need certain properties in order to be the kind of being that can fulfill the commission that was given,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
To be an imager of God. And so it is the likeness or the resemblance to God in certain properties that give us the power or the ability to image God, to reflect Him. I mean, just think about it. That makes logical sense. If the claim is God is saying, look, I want you to do the things that I would do,
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
then I need to resemble Him in some way
Yeah.
in the kinds of things that I can do. And so I think it's a both and.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, but then I think you get into there's still that objection where people could be listening to this and say, well, yeah, but that doesn't really solve the problem of, people who are in a coma, right? Like, are they still in the image of God? And this is a very important question for medical ethics, right? Because we have so-called medical ethicists who are out there arguing that, like, we should be fine with, you know um, killing people who are, just chronically depressed.
Mm,
And there are people who believe that that's ethical and justified. And a Christian would say that, no, you can't do that because there's something intrinsically value about all human beings, no matter how they find themselves. So you do have to ask the question of, like, okay, so somebody in a coma who's probably going to remain in a coma, like, forever, the rest of their natural life, are they still in the image of God? And so then you have to say, um, I think at a certain point you do have to rest a little bit more on the ontological side of things, because, like, you have to make a sort of argument about, well, ontologically, humanity in its perfected form, in its ideal form, is the type of being that's capable of all these things. But you are still a human being, even if you do not actively manifest all of those
yeah.
properties or all of those capacities. So there is just a certain identity that is there that you insist on substantially. And I think that, like, a lot of our ethical arguments, especially nowadays, are just allergic to just ontological
Reasoning.
surety,
Yeah.
ontological reason. And so to be able to point to something and say, well, that's a human being. Intrinsically, we know this, right? A baby, that's a human being. Person in a coma, that's a human being. But to express that in a philosophical sense, you really have to insist on a deep, deep, grounded ontology in a way that a lot of practical, ethical, and philosophical arguments nowadays are not really comfortable with.
Well, I would even say that even just their existence still on this earth, maybe they're not cognitively able to be doing something
Mhm.
that I would argue that they still might be doing something for God, even
Yeah,
laying in that bed.
Yes.
yeah,
I think you could take it even a step further and say we don't know, spiritually what is actually happening with them personally. But I mean, who knows what they could be changing
You
people's lives for Christ just by
yes,
laying in
Well,
that
I mean,
bed.
and we've talked a lot about in other episodes. Listen to our episodes where we talk about the providence of God,
Yeah.
His meticulous providence of
Mhm.
history. I would almost guarantee
mhm,
Yeah.
that within the
They're here
purview
for
of
a
God's
reason.
that's
yeah,
exactly right. He
Yeah.
knows the reasons why.
Mhm.
But in terms of the value question, which Jeremy has pointed out, which is this is a huge component of this, right? This is an assumption
mhm,
that people in the secular world make about humanity. I'm glad they do because it's correct,
yes,
Mm.
right? Everyone has this base level agreement that humans have intrinsic value. Human beings have intrinsic worth, right? And what I would challenge is to say, why? What is it that gives us intrinsic worth? And when I say intrinsic, I mean it is a part of the very nature, the fact that you are a human being, right? You have value.
Mhm.
And even the people who pay lip service to claiming, no, I don't believe that, they behave in such a way as though they believe it,
yeah.
Yeah.
right? And so the question is why? What is this based on? And not just from a historical point of view, it is from a historical point of view. Read Tom Holland's book Dominion if you
Oh,
want to hear why that's the case. Um, this is owed to the Judeo-Christian worldview, but also I think that it is baked into the fabric of who we are in such a
yes,
way that we just innately know this, right?
Mhm.
We just know that humans have value, and to sort of analogize the thing that you were describing, that both of you were describing about this whole idea. I think maybe even you mentioned a car earlier. It's like, okay, so an automobile
mhm,
is the kind of thing that transports people from point A to point B. Okay, well, if the engine explodes or let's say the transmission breaks, the
mhm.
rest of the engine is functional, but the transmission breaks, the vehicle will not be able to move or do anything. It will be able to do almost nothing it was designed to do, right?
Right.
Because of this malfunction, right? And so we can analogize this and say this is like the person who has some kind of incapacitation, whether it be from birth or from trauma or
Mhm.
whatever, is they have this incapacitation. And my question is it still a car?
I think most normal people would
Would
say
say
yes.
yes, right? Maybe it's a car that has a dysfunction,
Yeah,
right? It's not operating in the way that it was intended to,
Right.
but it's still a car, right?
but
Mhm.
Because it
yeah.
it has this ontology
Well,
Yeah.
I think too, maybe a one way to think about image is just to go back to the just baseline meaning, the surface meaning, and think about that, right? What is an image? It's what something looks like. It has to do with what we can see, what we can perceive, to put it more broadly. And so when you think about idols, when you think about images, pictures, or whatever, the thing that strikes you initially is not a deep understanding of ontology. It's not a deep understanding of the materials used to make something or what it actually is, or even necessarily who made it and why. But there's a sense of like an aura, right? This is a word that's like common in slang, right? He's aura maxing, right? He's aura farming. He's trying to do things to make him look cool, to like improve his social standing. But like aura is a word that philosophers of art, like I'm thinking of Walter Benjamin, has used in the 20th century as the a non-substantial characteristic of a work of art, right? A thing that can't be reduced to the physicality of it or the perceivable qualities of it, but that nonetheless exist, right? And so the Captain America Steve Rogers, if you see this sitting on a shelf, it has a certain kind of aura. It has a certain kind of thing that it gives off. It's kind of like a statement that you don't even necessarily have to understand the Avengers or Marvel or whatever, but just by the fact of being what it is, it gives a certain impression. And I would argue that in a certain way, when you see a human being,
Mm.
when you encounter a human being, no matter what state they're in, no matter what capacities, I think that one of the implications of image is that we kind of have that same thing. And this is what we're talking about when just intrinsically we know all humans have value. All humans have aura. All
Yeah.
humans have the
Yeah.
aura of an echo of something divine.
Yeah.
And it's this
Yeah.
image.
Well, and I think that kind of proves the point of why we need both of those because I mean, the heavens declare the glory of God as well. I can look at nature and just it has that aura about it because it was created by Him. But I think what sets us apart as image bearers is that not only do we bear His image in that capacity, but we also do things
Mm.
in His image. We bear Him wherever we go. I'm just like to kind of I know we're kind of coming up on time to kind of I guess wrap it up. I want to go back to um make a connection maybe to Jesus and for a minute and just in thinking of the 10 commandments where we kind of started. He starts the first commandment is have no other gods before me. And I think what we're kind of getting at here is just that relationship with him. We're not supposed to have anybody above him. We're supposed to bear his image. And then the rest of the commandments go on and talk about how it's really relational with other people. Don't steal, don't kill. So I just feel like from the beginning, when he put his image in us, we were meant to be in relationship with him. And then I'm not quite sure how I'm trying to tie it together, but even thinking about like Jesus and all of his teachings, like the Sermon on the Mount, it's all relational. It's all
Yeah.
about how we relate to each other, and how we relate and have relation with God in our prayer life. And so I'm just trying to make the connection of we are the image of God. We are to bear his image by how we relate to one another here on earth and how we relate to God.
Yeah.
And I really think that is like the bulk of why we were made in his image. We were made in his image to be one with him, have a relation with him, and then to be that representation here on earth.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think sort of by way of closing thoughts for me would be to sort of echo what you're saying by pointing out the fact that being made in God's image, but the fact that we resemble Him, right? That we have His likeness, and it is a commission that we are to perform. Um, there is an obstruction. There is something that has defaced the image. Um, and it affects everything. It affects our relationship vertically with God,
Mhm. Mhm.
right? Because we are supposed to reflect Him, and if the reflection has been broken in some way, now there's a vertical relationship problem. And if we are supposed to reflect the image of God outward, which is what the be fruitful, multiply, have dominion kind of thing is about, fill the earth, right,
Yeah.
with with God's image. If that's the case, um, and we're not properly reflecting His image, now all of our horizontal relationships are damaged,
Mhm.
Yes.
right? Which is what it's talking about in Romans 1, right? When it says that they did not give thanksgiving and honor God the Creator, but rather they worshiped the creature, right? And then it talks about images and idols of creeping things and so forth, right? So it distorts our relationship, and then it talks about dysfunctional human relationships.
Mhm.
And the reason why is because we're no longer reflecting God vertically. Now horizontally we have this problem. It alters our worship, and it alters our communion with one another.
Mhm.
And so I think what I would want to say is this. The thing that obstructs the image of God is not whether or not you have some kind of physical or mental incapacity. It's not what stage of development that you are as a human being. Rather, the thing that distorts the image of God is sin.
Mhm.
Yes.
Yeah.
And when we sin, what we are doing is we are reflecting something else.
Yes.
We're reflecting something other than God's image and likeness.
Mhm.
And so I think my admonition to all of our listeners and viewers is to say, let's think about sin in this way, because what we really are doing when we sin, or when we succumb to sin, we are behaving, we are acting in a way that is subhuman.
Yeah.
Mm.
So that's profound, because the claim is not just we are not just sinning against God. We are doing that first and foremost, but we are also um, sinning against ourselves, in the sense that we are we are not fulfilling the purpose that we were created to be. We are acting in a way that is contrary to our
Yeah.
own nature,
Yeah.
right? So it's subhuman in the sense that it is
Mhm.
contrary to the nature of God, but because we were made to be His reflection, it is
Yeah.
contrary to our own nature.
And
Yeah.
and it's not even really a competing image. It's just something that's formless and void and
It's
just
a
chaos.
privation of
Yeah.
God's image. Yeah.
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 I think that's right.
Yeah. Well, and God knew that his people continued to get this wrong. And so he sent another image bearer, Jesus, to come and that's why he said, I came to fulfill the law.
Yeah.
And show you the way
Well,
in which that you can be an image bearer.
what John does in the prologue to his gospel, I know I've referred to it a million times on the podcast, but it's really profound, because what he says is, look, um, the image of God, and in fact, the unfiltered, undiluted image of God, looking upon God Himself, is something that humanity could not do.
Mm.
Moses and the patriarchs wanted to
Mhm.
do it and could not do it.
Yeah.
And he says, look, and when Jesus has come into the earth, we have seen him. We have beheld his glory, the
Yeah.
glory of the only begotten of the Father, full of grace and truth. And we have seen him for what he is. And so when we become believers, we are being conformed to the image of his Son.
Mm.
Why? Because Jesus is the fullness of God's image,
Yeah.
perfected in the way that Adam was intended to be. He is the last Adam.
Mm.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. This was a great episode. Um lots to ponder on. We went deep, a little bit deeper than my mind was ready to go today, but it was really a really awesome thing. So thank you so much for tuning in. Catch up on some episodes if you haven't already. Follow us on all of our social medias, and we'll see you next time.